Hey, Coach, we are live. And we are live this time. So, hey, I'm going to be popping in here. I wanted to do we had some questions about the practice plan workshop throughout, and I didn't answer questions during the actual original live streams Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I wanted to do a couple things. I wanted to kind of recap the 3-day event. I'm going to go through it real quick. This isn't going to be a very long live stream, and I do want to address some of the questions that were asked and that were emailed to me during the stream of these 3 days. So some coaches had some questions. I had a lot of really fantastic emails. I really appreciate every single one of them. Read them all, and I'm pretty sure I replied to everyone by now. But I really appreciate you guys taking it. Hopefully, a lot of this, again, if some of this is new, hopefully it's gives you some ideas of some things you can do. If you've seen or done some of this before, or do some of this, hopefully that reinforces some of the stuff that you already do. And even if it's not new, or if it is new and you don't do it, but maybe it sparks an idea that kind of helps you, like, hey, this is going to help me out in this other area, or this gives me a different idea. That's kind of what these are about. So I really hope you guys get a lot out of this. So let's kind of go through it, and let's recap here. Then I'll get to some Q&As. I'll go through the Q&As as we're kind of going through these. So basically, so day one of the practice of the workshop, we basically talked about, so how do we build the structure of a practice? And time management was the big one that we went in talking about, but there's a lot of other type of management when it comes to building out the structure of our practice, because time's a limited resource. So I take every minute seriously in our practice. We don't want to waste any time in practice with anything that we want to make sure that we get everything in we possibly can. So we want to plan every single little thing out, so we get every single thing done in practice that we possibly can. So basically, trying to figure out how much time you have in practice. Do you have time daily, weekly? How many hours of practice you're going to have? Obviously, knowing all of that's going to inform how much time you spend on doing certain things. If you only have 90 minutes or 60-minute practices, which some lower level programs do, or AAU or stuff like that, then you're going to want to, hey, there's going to be a little bit of, there's always a sacrifice. There's always going to be like, well, we're going to have to, because we're short on time, we're going to have to sacrifice the complexity of the offense we want to run, because we just don't have the time to do all that. Or we're going to have to get there through a longer period of time, weeks, months, years, to install everything that we want to install program wide. So, but knowing how much time you're going to have was very important. And then we talked about the actual court availability. So how do you manage, not only do you manage your time in practice, but how do you manage your time on the court? Or, how many courts do you have? How many teams do you have? So if you have a varsity JV freshman team in one gym in a 3-hour time slot, you got to figure out who's practicing with who. Obviously our varsity is immediately the most important, and where our focus is going to be if you're a varsity coach. But we have to try to maximize what's going to be best for us and best for the program as a whole. So, do your varsity and JV practice together? What does your freshman do? So I did have a question. So Latrice asked during day one, she asked it, said, we practice our varsity and JV together due to low numbers. Makes perfect sense. Also, they have a large skill gap between their better and poor players, between their varsity and JV type players. They're very guard heavy, and only a few will play varsity. Any tips would be appreciated. And I would say something. I would say that, like, if you're in that situation where you only have 17, 18 kids, there's nothing you can do but practicing together, and you only have 5 or 6 players, or a few that are actually going to play varsity. It's like, okay, now we have that talent gap. So how do you approach that when it comes? I mean, there's nothing else you can do except practice varsity against, and maybe not your full JV, but your top 5 versus your next 5. You have to. I mean, I don't know where that talent gap splits, but depending on who you're practicing with, there's also some ways that if you just can't be as competitive in practice because you don't have the players. Something that we used to do with the girls program is we would have our varsity girls practice against the freshman boys. If that freshman boys team was too good, we would take our varsity girls, we would practice against our 7th and 8th grade boys. And that was probably, and that ended up, especially with our 8th grade boys for where we were at, and even our freshmen at some points, where we were able to compete probably a little bit better than that team. Now, it depends on where you're at. Can you schedule something on court where you're mixing your varsity girls with maybe your middle school boys? Is that something that you guys can work out so you can level up the amount of competitiveness in practice? Because if you feel like there's too much of a skill gap, you're getting really good repetition, but you're not getting a really good look of what a varsity game is going to look like. So that's when I would try to bring in another team. And sometimes, I mean, I think a lot of middle school teams, boys teams would love to practice against better teams as well, because they also have talent gaps or skill gaps within their own team, because there's so many more kids, sometimes so many more a variety range of kids on a 7th or 8th grade team, boys or girls. And maybe they want to also be able to have a better practice, a better competitive practice. So that might be something that you might look at. Okay. So, who do you group together in your, so now you decided varsity and JV are practicing, we talked about who do you group together in your practices. You can just have 10 varsity kids, 10 JV kids, 10 freshman kids. If you had three practices, your varsity and JV can practice together. Your freshmen can practice alone. Maybe there's a little bit of an overlap. The way I did it is I structured it. I took my 7-8 and this took me about my second and third year to really implement. Especially my second. My first year was hard to do this. My varsity went together with, I think, 12, and then my JV and freshman went together separately. And then eventually we kind of molded it to this model where I took my best 7-8 players, and then I took my next 5 best players, and sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 of those would end up being our JV kids, and our varsity would practice alone, and our JV and freshmen would practice together. And I did have another question about that. So Shakira asked, so would all of those swing type players not practice JV at all? And that's, I wouldn't say no to that. I would say sometimes we would take those JV players, and if there was something our JV coach wanted to do, say, hey, we're putting some of this stuff in, we would take those JV players a couple days a week, or maybe some of those JV kids would just practice about 15, 20 minutes longer, or maybe once or twice a week, go 30 minutes longer, and practice with their JV team, especially leading up to games where they could work on maybe some specific baseline out of bounds, sideline out of bounds stuff. But no, there would be times where we would try to get those JV kids reps with their team. And sometimes that would be like, sometimes we would have to go varsity JV together. We would just have to. We want to get a different look. We would have to go varsity JV, or we wanted to. We would take those bottom 5 JV kids, put them on that JV team, and then let JV coach go take those kids and then talk about some of the adjustments that they're making. But what we do is we teach the same thing, freshman, JV, varsity. Okay, varsity does the same thing freshman does, except we have a lot more stuff. Okay, but we teach the core offense the same way. The freshman runs the most core offense that we do, core defense. JV advanced a little bit above that. Varsity a lot advanced above what JV does. So the varsity kids know, the varsity JV swing kids know what they're doing at the JV, except for maybe some baseline out of bounds, sideline out of bounds, maybe just a couple little things here or there. So we will send them down there periodically so that they can get reps with that, and so they can actually work and play with those other kids as well. So there will be definitely times when we do that, but for the core parts of practice, they mainly practice with the varsity. And then Chris asked, to prevent boredom and tedium, would you alter or change the pattern? I think this was a little bit. Let me keep going with this practice, and I think that question is going to be for a little bit later. So we talked about all of these different ways that you can practice, the advantages of leveling up your lower players, getting them, if they can't play varsity, at least they can practice with varsity kids. So when they become varsity players, they at least have a year's worth of varsity experience playing against varsity type players. So they're not just blown away when the first time they step on a varsity court and they're, wow, we're playing against kids that are better than us. No, they've already done that before. So I get to coach the JV kids. The JV kids get more. The true JV kids get more reps, or your middle to lower level JV players get more repetition. Your freshman gets better practice competition when they get to practice against JV sophomores and maybe some juniors that are on the JV team. So all of this stuff that we talked about, it's something that some of the stuff that we had to pay attention. Like team chemistry, that's definitely one we have to work on and talk about. Do your players understand why we're doing this way? Do your parents understand? Does your admin understand why we're doing the things that we're doing? Why our players are playing in certain places? And are you doing things, like I said, sometimes taking those JV kids and those swing JV kids and sending them down with the JV team to go work with their class, with their group of kids, to get to know what they're doing, and also to be around the kids in the same grades that they are, the kids that that they're going to be playing with in games. So you do have to balance that a little bit. And I think that if you lead your program a certain way and communicate your program a certain way, that everyone's going to pretty much understand that pretty well. So talked about time slots. This is so what I did with time slot wise is we went 3 to 6 with boys, 6 to 9 with girls. So our varsity, when we did this split where my varsity, I have my JV up, our varsity would go 3 to 5 for 2 hours. Our JV would go 4 to 6, 2 hours, but there'd be a 1 hour overlap. So you're asking, so when do we switch those? When can we switch those kids? It would be sometime during that hour overlap, and it's usually the last 30 minutes. Okay, it's usually the last 30 minutes when we're maybe working on some full course stuff. We pour a JV in to go against them a little bit. That would be one of those times where we might do some of those, hey, swing players, go back down to JV. Okay, that might be a time we do that. And then what we do is our freshman group, we would go 4:30 to 6. They get 90 minutes. They would overlap for a little bit. They would overlap 30 minutes. For 30 minutes, we have all 3 teams in the gym, but they would be on the side baskets, working on their layups and their shooting and stuff like that while we went up and down on the full court. So sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. And then we talked about how we actually break down the actual structure of practice. So I break it down into 4 quarters: skill work, offense, defense, game situation. We emphasize what we call the progression method, repetition stacking, and competitive execution. So we want to teach things in a certain way. We want to make sure we maximize reps. So we're just not the stuff that we do in skill work, we make sure that they see in offense. The stuff that we do defensively, we make sure they see somewhere else in the court. And it just stacks on top of each other. That way, it's just not like we do one drill at the beginning of practice and then they don't see that. They don't see where that manifests itself in a game. Okay, we're really particular about making sure that, hey, the things that we're going to teach here, that, hey, remember that in and out movement we made? This is where you're going to use this in the offense. Okay, and we're very specific about that. We don't, we kind of cut out a lot of the skill work drills that were just the 3-man weave. When do you see that in a game? We just stopped doing it. It just didn't make sense. We would rather spend that 5 minutes, 7 minutes running a transition drill where there's 5 players on the court, So those are some of kind of the adjustments that we made. We want to do things in a particular order that makes sense, that emphasizes repetition, and then we want to stack what we rep so that they see it in different places throughout the entire practice. And then we want to be able to, turn this practice into competitive execution. Okay. All right. So the first quarter is when we broke down all of our skill work. The second quarter is when we broke down all of our offense. The third quarter is when we broke down all of our defensive stuff. And then the fourth quarter is when we did all of our game situation. And a lot of coaches will ask, like, so is it 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes if you have a 2-hour practice? Well, the reality is, for me, what we ended up doing was, depending on where I felt we needed the most work that day. So sometimes our skill sessions would start out at about 25 minutes. That's kind of where I felt we've gone skill. I've done skill work for 35 minutes before, but something that I did is I felt like the skill work we wanted to get in, we would go for 25 minutes. And then basically what I did was I bought 5 minutes for our offense. So what I did is I did our offense for 35 minutes. Okay, and then our defensive session would come on, and we would do our defensive session for also 35 minutes. And that left us 20 minutes for this fourth quarter where we kind of mixed everything together. Now, once the practices kind of stacked on top of each other, and we got week 1 done, we got week 2 done, we got week 3 done. Now we started just, hey, skill work, we can take that back to 20, or skill work, hey, we want to keep it at 25, maybe up it to 30 so we can get some more. Maybe we wanted to break down our offense and do a shooting drill or something. So maybe we up that to 30. But now my offense only needs 30. Now we've got our foundation in, and we're not adding a lot of new stuff. So our offensive session we took from 30 minutes, we bumped it, or 35 minutes, we bumped it back down to 30. And we took our defensive stuff, we bumped it back down to 30. That way we had a 30-minute fourth quarter. And by January, February, and we're actually cutting our practice down to about 90 minutes, sometimes an hour 45. But what we would do is this fourth quarter would end up being like 40 minutes, 45 minutes, where it looked like a game. And we actually would start, what we would do is we would play like 3 or 4 8-minute running quarters during this fourth quarter session of practice, where we start throwing in kind of game situations. We make it really competitive. So that's something that we did there. So here's, I think, is the last. I got 2 more questions. Chris asked, to prevent boredom and tedium, would you alter or change the pattern to keep kids' attention longer and more effectively? I think this question ended up being on, well, that's a day 2 question. Okay, let's see. Nope, that's a day 1 question. Yeah, so basically, I always kind of feel like a lot of coaches want to mix things up in their practices, maybe the order of these quarters, just to kind of keep the players' attention. But the one thing I will do is if I feel like we need more emphasis defensively, my quarter one would be defense. And then we would go into skill. I like skill work and offense to go back to back because you get all of that stacking. So if I felt like I needed a point of emphasis made, then one thing I would do is I would take my defensive session, make it the first thing we do in practice, then get into our skill work, just to kind of set the tone, just to kind of let everyone know that we're serious about defense. We'll just do defensive first. So sometimes I would do that. And then actually, when we actually get into the practice plans on day 2, some of the drills that we do in the drill, we keep that very similar for a long time. And I know there is always that question about, well, do you kind of mix things up to keep kids on their toes, to keep them engaged, so it's not getting bored? Well, one thing that we have to do is we have to set the energy. We have to up the energy in practice. We need to encourage our players to talk, to pick up their teammates. And what happens is when they start getting better running the offensive stuff, when they start getting better at skill work and they start really seeing that improvement, they get more excited about doing those same drills. Now, we will add more complexity to the drills and stuff like that. So that's when we start teaching new stuff, those are some ways that we can really ratchet up some of the spontaneity of the drills that we're doing. But then there's also going to be points in practice where we would run when we get to competitive parts of practice, we would end practices on stuff like we would throw in is like called a 21-man game, or we would play 11-man game where it's like 11 on 11. And we would basically, it's like a 3-on-2 up and down, like a transition drill, a competitive transition drill. So there's always stuff that you can kind of throw in. You don't have to do it exactly like this, but this is what worked for me. This is kind of what I had taken from actually when I became a head coach. I kind of modeled a little bit of this after what I saw at the Air Force Academy, what I saw Richmond do. Because I'm a Princeton offense coach, I watch those practices. I've watched other practices. And a lot of them are very similar to this. And again, it's just to spark some ideas on some new things that you guys can do as well. So there was one more question. Do you include any speed work or strength work? Not during practices. Not during practices. We're not doing speed, agility, or strength. We're going to, if we want to work on that, there might be weight room sessions after practice. Like in season, we might, once or twice a week go into the weight room just to kind of maintain what we had been building up during the summer and the fall and the spring, the summer, and the fall. But we're not gonna do strength or quickness and agility inside of our practices unless we build them into the drill. So when we do layup drills, that's an explosion drill. When we do back cut drills, those are explosion drills. So in that sense we do, but in the broader sense, we don't spend a dedicated time to just those subjects. Okay, all right, okay. So that was all the review. And then what we did, and this is kind of moving into day 2. So day 2 of the practice plan workshop, we talked about installation frameworks, all right, and repetition stacking. And the core thing that I wanted to talk about during this day was the progression method. Okay, it's the progression method. This is different from everything that I've ever that I was taught as a player, as taught as a coach, as a young coach. Was we would always I learned as a player through the whole part whole method. I taught as an assistant coach with the whole part whole method. Show them the whole thing. That's what it looks like, and then break it down. But what I found was it almost felt like a style of trying to teach the game through memorization. Right? Depending on what you're doing. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I felt like teaching with that style, the players were memorizing the movements, and they weren't. Even though we gave them the epiphany. But it was more of a memorization game. Whereas when we teach through the progression method, it's more of a muscle memory game. Where now we're getting so many offensive reps using this method that it becomes muscle memory. Kids that I coached 10, 15 years ago, I could probably get them on the court in about a half hour, have them running a lot of stuff that we did because we just did it so dang much. And it's just like riding a bike. Okay, that's where I want to kind of get. That's kind of what I'm shooting for in our practices. We don't want them to memorize the plays. All right, we want it to be muscle memory. Throw the ball here, you do this. You throw the ball here, you do this. All right, and the defense takes this away, we do this. And it's just muscle memory. It's just automatic. So that was the main focus of day 2. No, we talked about, see, yeah, it's opposite of whole part whole. So, no, this is a structured approach to installation where it is, organized. It's a common sense application. The reads on the court they're going to make, hey, this happens first, this happens second. I use the analogy of a quarterback dropping back and looking at reads. You got read 1, read 2, read 3, read 4, and they go in those in order. They got their deep route, boom, they got their drop down route, they got the crossing route, boom, they got their they got a scramble. At the very end is like, hey, scramble or go down or throw the ball out of bounds. But they go through their reads. And we want to, I feel like, especially going through and becoming a Princeton offense coach, because of the complexity of the offense, this just works so extremely well. And then what I started doing is when I started looking at other offense, I'm like, man, this just works for everything. We use this method when we put in our defense as well. So it emphasizes repetition and repetition stacking, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And it flourishes 5-on-0 and 5-on-5 with that kind of teaching philosophy. I don't break down things 3-on-0, 4-on-0 to instruct how to run the offense or to learn the offense. It's really important for me. If I'm going to do something 3-on-0, 4-on-0, it's going to be a drill. And it's going to be a shooting drill or a layup drill or a back cut drill or a post-up drill or something like that where we can shorten the action so we can get more reps on the scoring action. That's when I'll go 3-on-0, 4-on-0. But I'm not going to go 3-on-0, 4-on-0 to teach the actual offense. So that's something I always want to really make sure that I emphasize, though. So let's see. Let's keep popping down here. My problem with whole part whole is like I think it relies more on external learning, whereas like we show them the answer before we even break it down. Okay, so we show them, hey, this is the flex. We're going to come off. We're going to make this pass. We're going to come off the flex. We're going to come off the down screen. We're going to make this pass. We're going to come off the flex. We're going to set a down screen. And we show them that. Then we go break it down 3-0, 4-0. Then we come back and hopefully that they memorized it well enough in pieces that they can, and because we showed them the whole thing at the beginning, they can come back and they can do it. And it's us giving them the answer where the progression method, hey, they're not going to learn the offense, or they're not going to see what the big picture is going to be until they get close enough to the picture. So we're going to start far away from the big picture, and we're going to start just knocking down this. We're going to do this piece first, and this piece first, and this piece second, this piece third, and this fourth, and this fifth. And what's going to happen once you get to step 7, 8, 9, 10, they're going to start to see the whole picture. And what happens is they get this epiphany internally. It's like a when you're self-taught. I use that example. When you're self-taught, you have to go so deep and you have to go through so many things to when you learn it, you've got it. Okay, and that's pretty much the big difference between those two methods of installation. Okay, all right. So players do what they repeat over and over, and they also do what you emphasize. So when it comes to repetition stacking, we talked about this a little bit. It's the idea of strategically repping action that your players are going to see again and again and again later in practice. Okay, so when we actually broke down some of these practice plans, you would see this. And you're going to see it's like when we do in and out blow-bys or in and out crossovers, one of the point guards coming up the floor and say, hey, this is where you're going to use that in and out to create an angle so you can make a good passing lane. All right, and then we kind of went through here. We went through, and again, I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You can go back and still watch the replays. I'm going to leave them up through tonight and then probably Monday or Tuesday before I just completely remove them. But we went through and we broke down all of these practice plans. This is the skill session part of practice. Here's the offensive session part of practice. And I use the Chin series as one because we have a lot of Princeton offense coaches here, obviously. Here's the defensive session of practice, building it up little by little, just kind of adding on to it. And then here's where you see a lot of this repetition stacking coming in here. It's like, hey, we do our rebounding and do our transition. They see a lot of the stuff that they saw in the skill work part of practice and also in the offensive part of practice and the defensive part of practice. So that's my practice plan framework. That's kind of how we put everything together. That's what we did on day 2. Okay, so now we skip all of this and let's go down to day 3. All right, and this was the day that we talked about competitive execution. How do you level up your practice intensity for game preparation? How do you make your practices harder than the games? That's really the most difficult thing I think we can do is how do you make your practices more difficult than games? Because there's a lot of roadblocks to this. There's a lot of things that we have is like, we don't have enough varsity players in the gym to actually mimic what our opponents are going to do. No, so it becomes very, very difficult. How do you make practices more competitive? You know, where our second team, sometimes there's that big, deep skill gap that you have there. Okay. I did have another question. So, Eric, he asked on day 2. So let me get this real quick. You play on an outdoor rough course, so teaching kids to dive on the ball and taking charges in the dirt and stuff like that. How can kids be trained without bruising up themselves? And that was from day 2. We talked about some of the drills that we do in our defensive session. Sometimes you have to get creative. I know there's a lot of coaches out there that aren't fortunate to have nice gyms and solid courts and stuff like that. So you have to be creative. You know, it's kind of like the Karate Kid. You know, he takes the kid out in the water, in the waves, and makes him do stuff. Is there anywhere out in the grass where you can teach kids how to slide and stuff like that? I don't know. You have to be creative when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, sorry, I did forget that question. So, okay, back to making practices competitive. Can you show the second quarter screen? Yeah, I can go back here just real quick. And again, the second quarter screen. That was sorry, I just saw that comment back up here. The second quarter screen, would that be the defensive screen? Is that what you wanted to see? So what we do defensively, was it the practice plan? This is what we did defensively in the second quarter. Second quarter, that would be the offensive. That would be the offensive stuff that we did. Is that what you're looking for? And you can go back and you can watch these actual if you didn't see the actual full challenge, you guys can go back and check those out. So, but this was the offensive session, the second quarter, if that's what you're looking for. I believe that I've got another. Boom, that one right there. Maybe that's the one that you're looking for. So yeah, this is what we do in the second quarter, the offensive stuff. Okay, and you can go back. I don't want to spend a lot of time on all of these slides because you can go back and watch the full. You can go back and watch the full challenges. I'll leave them up a couple more days, and I'll send a couple more emails out so you guys don't miss those. Okay, all right. So making your practices competitive. I did this 2 ways. One, there's an internal way to do this because you have to talk about your players psychologically. You know, because your players are competing in. They're competing in I put down 4 different ways. They're competing with you, their coach, or they can compete with you as their coach. They can compete with their teammates, which obviously they do. Some players will compete with their opponents. This is something we emphasize. And a lot of players, I would say less players would compete with themselves internally. Okay? And we broke down a lot of it. So when they compete with you as their coach, there's a good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is, we're trying to provide inspiration. Okay? The bad is when we are the source of their motivation. And sometimes we have to motivate them, but we want that motivation to come from inside. So we want them to be inspired and not motivated. If we have to coach effort every single day, it makes that grind so much more difficult. And we want them to come in inspired so that they have that internal energy themselves. All right. The one place we want to avoid is we want them to avoid competing against us as a coach where they're trying to prove us wrong. Now, there are little bits and pieces of times where we can go in and do this. We can say, hey, look, we can go in and be the bad guy on some days. If we feel like they just need a kick in the butt, we can be the bad guy. And then they're going to be competing against us. But we don't want that to be every day, or that's when your team can really kind of turn on you. The players will really turn on you if they feel like they're always butting their heads up against. They're fighting you, and they're not fighting their opponents. Or they're not competing with themselves to improve. They're more so doing it to prove you wrong. Hey, you're wrong. You're wrong about this. We kind of want to put that on another. We want to put that target on someone else's back. Right? We want to put that on our opponent's back. We want to put that on the world's back. Hey, everyone, no one believes in us. No one believes in you. We want them competing against that idea. We don't want them competing against me as coach. I don't think you guys are good enough. I don't think you guys can get this done. Sometimes we have to go in again, to shake things up a little bit. You go in there one day. I use the Ted Lasso example during day 3, this was day 3. But go back and watch that if you haven't seen that yet. Okay. The second one that they're going to compete against is with themselves, with their teammates. So they're going to push each other to improve daily. That's the good. The bad is when they compete and they start getting emotional. which it's going to happen. I'm not saying this isn't something that you can completely remove. Players are going to get emotional, but when it turns ugly is when they can't leave that on the court, and they take that emotion off the court and into the locker room and outside the locker room and into the school, and then kids are talking about each other, and that's what we want to avoid. We want them competing against each other to improve each other, but we want to make sure that things can get physical and intense and emotional on the court, but we're all on the same team. So we want to make sure that we really emphasize that. The third thing that we talked about, who they're competing against are their opponents. The good is they're working harder and longer, knowing their rival is too. Their rival, hey, we're going to let them outwork us, or we're going to let them. You're telling me we're going to let them work harder than we are? Because I think they're working harder than we are right now. No, we want to. It's kind of like taking that target and putting it over there. Okay. Sometimes you can all say competing against your opponents or competing against the media. Like, hey, this is what they said about it. They have us picked 7th in our league in the newspaper, stuff like that. Competing against an outside source. All right. The bad part about something like this is they know that they're good, and we start to become overconfident. Or we don't believe. Maybe in the newspaper they picked us number 1. It's like, hey, we know we're good. We know we're. And what happens then is we start to fall into that mindset, and we get upset. Okay. The ugly is when our motivation is just simply to humiliate a program. And actually, I think I did this. Nope. That's right. When our motivation is simply to humiliate our opponents, when we're like, we don't like, it's almost like when they take it personal. We hate these opponents. And what happens is when we get into that mindset, we no longer respect our opponent. And if we don't respect our opponent, it doesn't matter who they are, better than us, evenly matched with us, not nearly as good as us, every one of them can beat us. Okay, if we're in that mindset where we do not respect them, our motivation, I should have worded this differently. I should have said, when we lose respect for our opponents, that is the ugly. All right, plain and simple. Okay, and then the last one that we compete against is ourselves. All right, when they're competing against themselves individually. Well, the good part of this, they're self-aware, and they have an internal drive to improve. We know, hey, I know I'm not good at ball handling, so I've got to get better at ball handling. Hey, I know I've got to work on my shooting, so I work on my shooting. Right? That's what we want them. We want them to. I know I'm not cutting really hard, so I'm going to try to cut harder. Or I'm going to try to cut harder more consistently. Things like that. They're competing with themselves to make themselves better. The bad is when they start to become obsessed. Now, being obsessed is actually good. But what I talked about here is when they don't have. I'm going to have to skip one because I actually kind of rewrote this one up. Here's the one that I rewrote. So the good. Let me restart this one over because I did this. I didn't fix the slides. So the good was they develop an obsession to thrive. They're self-motivated. All right, they're inspired. All right, when they're self-aware, they have an internal drive to improve. That's the good. The bad is when they start their patience wane, when things aren't going their way, when they're not improving to the speed that they want. They start to get frustrated, and they slow things down. They're banging their hand on the wall. They're kicking the basketball. They're getting frustrated. Okay, the ugly, when players are competing against themselves, is when they lose all self-grace and they just burn out. They're like, I'm not getting any better. I'm working my tail off, and they just burn out. Sometimes this could be because they play one sport all year round. Maybe their parents are pushing them too hard, and they don't have any grace anymore. They're like, I can't be perfect like mom and dad want me to be perfect. Okay, and they just burn out and they quit. Okay, this is the part where we do not want them to get to. So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to this and we're getting feedback and we're giving feedback and we're communicating with them so that we don't get to this point, because this is when we start losing basketball players, good basketball players, right? Some players burn out, and it's kind of one of those situations where that player needs us more than we need them, but we don't want them to get to that point. Okay, we want to make sure that we do our best to help communicate that. So then here we talked about so those are some ideas about how to up the level of competitiveness with your players from like a psychological standpoint. And then we went through and broke down how do we improve our practices, like on court, how do we make them more competitive? So we talked about the skill sessions, trying to get more energy into practice. This has got to come from the players. And actually, it's got to come from the players, but we have to teach them how to do this, how to pick each other up, how to reward players, how to be vocal when good things happen, how to communicate, all of that. Some other things we'll do in our skill session is we'll add defenders to drills, defend cutters, defend layups, defend post moves, put coaches on stuff. We'll get the pads out, all this kind of stuff to make things more competitive. And then holding everyone accountable. Counting our makes, counting our misses. And then having consequences for not getting to the makes or having too many misses. Okay, those are things that we can do to make our skill session, parts of practice more competitive. The offensive session, this is where it gets kind of tricky. Early on, 5-on-0 is so necessary for repetition and timing and instruction. Okay, but we need to challenge the groups to compete on this execute. We got a group of 5, they go and they have a perfect possession, we're hooting and hollering. All right, and then next group, hey, same thing, next group, and next group goes in and they make a mistake, we got to hold them accountable. And then first group goes up and they do it again and they got it. The next group, it's kind of like shooting layups. There's no defense on layups. So kid makes a good move and it looks smooth. And, we reward them with that verbally, especially. But we want our players to reward the 5 that are on the floor about making that layup, making that extra pass, making that, executing the offense correctly. And then we want to get to 5-on-5 as soon as we can. So, first we want to see it. So now we can see, understand, and execute versus the defense. And once we go 5-on-5, initially it's not going to be where we're trying to tell the defense to take every single thing away, because sometimes we go 5-on-5, we need to instruct things. We need to say, the defense is going to guard you like this. This is how we need to execute it. So defense, guard us like that so we can execute like this. It's still a lot of learning and instruction. And if you get overly competitive, it's like sometimes now you can't practice the things you need to work on. Okay? Or we need to get to a spot where once we get to a spot, and this is why you have to be patient early on, because once you get to practice 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, week 2, especially leading into your first game, at that point you have option 1 or option 2. Defense, guard us however you want. Take option 1 away, boom, we got option 2. Take option 2 away, boom, we got option 1. Okay, and that's when the beauty of the Princeton offense is we always have a counter for something. But once you get into more live situations, so let's go to number 3, is we play possession games, where now we're going to start to keep score, count points, count turnovers, etc., stuff like that, to keep our players focused and competitive. And now we're saying, if we're a pressure team, pressure them. If we're a denial team, deny them. In offense, you know what to do when they do that. And we'll offense goes 3 on, 3 off, 3 on, 3 off, and we'll do something like that. And we'll keep score. We'll count points. We'll count turnovers. We'll make all of that competitive. And very similar defensive wise, except sometimes defense is more effort, attitude, intensity. So we're going to be competitive from the jump. We're going to find pride in the little things, hustle plays, deflections, stops. We're going to reward them heavily for all those little hustle plays. And then we're also going to reward the defense over the offense. So defense gets extra praise for defensive execution, because defensive, again, it's an attitude thing. It's an effort thing. It's an intensity thing. Okay, sometimes it's, we still want them to make the right decisions and guard things the correct way, but sometimes hustle and hard work and that grind can overcome what they're not doing, or maybe a mistake or something like that. Okay, so that's really important. And then the final portion of practice, again, at first we start out teaching, instructing, so we have to be patient early on in practices, but as they learn what we're doing and as they learn the offense and the defense and the transition and everything that we're teaching, we crank up the intensity ASAP. All right, and now these sessions are going to be win focused. You want to win every single possession. Or you win every single possession. These possessions are we don't take these for granted. Okay, possessions are priceless. Offensive possessions, defensive possessions. You've got to be focused on every single pass. All right, you've got to be ready for every single one. So, if we turn the basketball over, and if we go on a streak of turning it over or getting bad shots, we're going to lose games. All right, so we need to crank up the intensity, make each possession win focused. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll do is I'll stack the odds. This is how we make our JV and freshmen who are competing against our varsity in practices, how to make the games more competitive. So we'll make the game more difficult, make the practice game more difficult than game night. The way we do that is, like, if we can't compete against peers in practice, we'll take our varsity versus our JV, and our varsity. If we're going up, say like we're going up an 8-minute quarter, or we're going to do any kind of competitive drill, varsity, 2 points worth 2, 3 points worth 3, free throws worth free throws. All right, JV groups gets the same thing, 2 points worth 2, 3 points worth 3, free throws worth free throws. But If the varsity turns it over, JV gets a point. If the JV gets an offensive rebound, JV gets a point. Okay, so stuff like that. We'll start adding those little things in. Or let's say that maybe instead of if there's a turnover, JV actually gets 2 points. Offensive rebounds, JV gets 2 points. Whatever you have to do to adjust it to make it even more competitive. Okay, those are the things that we'll do to really up the competitiveness of practice. So hopefully those give you some good ideas. Hopefully, I'm sure you do a lot of these already, or hopefully this sparks an idea of something that you can do to up the competitiveness in your practice. And if there's something that an idea you came up with that I didn't talk about, let me know in the comments because I'd love to see those. But real quick, I did want to run through this one more time, if it's okay. Are you interested? I have the opportunity. I'm working with a team on the court here in at this point, about 3 weeks, 2.5 to 3 weeks. I'm going to actually work on the court with a varsity boys team for 2 days. It's actually, we're going to do five practice sessions on Friday and Saturday with varsity and JV. This is not a coaching clinic. We're not streaming this live. This is a real practice. We are recording it, and I wanted to know if you would be interested in the replays. If you guys want to be able to watch this, okay? It is an exclusive event, and if you're interested in seeing this practice or getting the replays of this practice, you can kind of compare to what we're doing to what maybe you're doing. Let me know down below in the chat, okay? Whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, or if you're watching a replay, just kind of let me know in the chat. I'm gonna go through it real quick because I know we've got some yeses, we've got some that coach that we have a few that are already jumped in. But basically, what's going to happen is October 20th and 29th are the first 2 official practices for boys in Ohio. Okay, and I'm working with a local varsity team. They've only won 9 games over the last 7 years, but they have some good players coming up. They had a lot of young players play varsity last year. They're probably 2 years away from actually maybe actually making a big dent. But this is going to be one of those try to get over the hump hills. This is one of those years where this year they're trying to learn how to compete. All right, and then next year they'll be trying to learn how to win. They're gonna be in a lot of close games this year, but they've won I think 1 or 2 games last year. Looking at their schedule, they think that they have an opportunity. We could probably win half our games. We could probably win 10, 11 games. If we won 7 games, it would like blow the socks off of the school because they haven't done that in over 7 years. They haven't had a winning record. I don't know how much longer than that. So what we're doing is from 3 to 7, we have a 4-hour session where we're going to go with the varsity for 3 hours and the JV with 2 hours. We're going to overlap an hour, kind of similar to what we would do with a group that I had. This is something similar that I would do because we want to really start to practice off with a bang, or start the first practices off with a bang. Saturday in Ohio, practices started Friday and Saturday, like just around when I became a head coach. So early to mid 2000s, they switched this up and we took advantage of it. And we do a 2-a-days on Saturday, kind of like football does. So our varsity is going to go for 2 hours. Our JV is going to come back for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And then our varsity is going to wrap it up for 2 hours. It's going to be like 1 to 7, 1 to 6:30, something like that. And we're going to work on everything that we've done on court installation. These are going to be real practices. They are going to be offensively. There are going to be offensive heavy practices because coach is basically using me to help jumpstart what they're doing with their Princeton offense, because we are installing the Princeton offense with them. We're installing the point series, the low post series, and the chin series. They want to run in transition, so we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we do that. We're going to hammer the skill work because if we don't teach the skills and the concepts of the game, it's going to be more difficult for them to execute. Teach them how to flow everything together. And we're actually also going to be installing the pack line defense for them as well, and maybe a couple other auxiliary things, but that's the core stuff. Basically, what we're doing is we're going to install their entire offense in 2 days. That's the goal. We're going to install their entire offense in 2 days, and then we're going to put the foundation of their defensive stuff in. That way, once they start out on Monday, it's like now they're just flying. Okay, that's the whole goal. And then what's going to do on Monday, they'll start to balance out the practices where it'll be about 50-50 offense, defense. But the offense takes longer to install, especially the Princeton offense. So we're going to hammer 2 days first. It's going to be about 10 hours on the court. And if you guys want to see this, This is exclusive for members of the PrincetonOffense.com. This is a new membership that we've created for our Princeton Offense coaches, where because previously we had an 8-week workshop that we sold for $500. We had an on-court passport, which is kind of what we're doing now. We record practices, which there are 2 other teams that I've worked with in the past. There's about 20 plus hours of on-court action, and it was also a $500 course. But right now, what we're doing is you can go get it now for $47, all right, and keep it as long as you want or as short as you want. But what you do is but this is, and the reason we did that is because we wanted to be more affordable for more coaches to get involved. So that's the reason that we made that change. But not only do you get to watch those practices that we're doing in a couple weeks, you also get my 21-day challenge that we did that's now private and exclusive to this group. We installed some new trainings, some offensive series packages. So if you want to learn how to go from every individual series to every other individual series, we just uploaded 2, the low post series and the chin series, and we're uploading point and open this week. We broke down a bunch of college film that's in there, a lot of our Princeton Offense Workshop, our 8-week Princeton Offensive Workshop. This is like the original program we put together is in there. It's like a 60-plus hour program. If you want to learn how to run any of the Princeton Offense together with any other part of the Princeton Offense, this is the ultimate program. And the Princeton Offense Workshop was the deep dive version of that. And then we also worked with another varsity boys team, another varsity girls team in a similar capacity. They were 10 and 12-hour practices as well, 2-day, 3-day practices. Those recordings are in there. You get my playbook, my practice plans, all of that stuff, my offense and defensive challenge that we just did for the general basketball group. All of that's in there. It's at the PrincetonOffense.com/all access. And you can get access to all of that for $47. And if you want to cancel before the 30 days is up, you can do that. If you want to keep it so you have more time to watch the stuff, you absolutely can do that. The middle school masterclass that we just did for our middle schools, where we show you how to break down all of the offenses as a continuity, those are included now exclusively to this membership. You can't get that by itself anymore, okay? If you stay an active member, this is like the last bonus we threw in there. If you stay an active member until the next clinic that we put on, we're going to be putting on a clinic next spring and next fall. If you're an active member, instead of paying $250 to come to that clinic, you can just pay $47 to come to that clinic. Okay, so that's the new thing that's going on. That's again, everything that we did in this practice plan workshop, we're going to be doing on the court. And I know a lot of coaches would love to see that. So if you want to see how we would, and I'm running the practices, I'm going to be doing most of the coaching and working with their head coach, of course, but they're going to basically let me go. And we're trying to shock this program into being competitive again, because we're trying to change the culture. So the brand new head coach to a brand new high school, to a group of players who do not know how to win, have not won before, and we're going to go in with the mindset that we're going to shock them into getting in that competitive winning mindset. So it's going to be an intense 2 days. It really is, and we're going to push these kids hard and fast. And I'm not going to stop to explain like it would be a coaching clinic. I'm going to be stopping to explain to the players from the players' perspective. So this is a real practice. And if you want to watch that practice and get along with everything else that we've ever done, go to the PrincetonOffense.com/all access. You guys can check that out. Okay. All right. For any coaches who are still here, do you guys have any questions for anyone that's watching live? If not, I will see you guys next week. We got a lot of neat stuff coming up the next 2 weeks leading up to this practice session up here with this varsity high school. So a lot of neat stuff to come, but I really appreciate you guys checking this out. And then also, I really appreciate you guys spending the last 3 days watching these workshops. Hopefully you're getting a lot of good stuff out of this, and hopefully a lot of ideas, a lot of new ideas, a lot of reaffirming old ideas, or a lot of just sparking brand new, fresh ideas that you guys can apply to your programs. All right, Coach, if there's nothing else, I'll let you go, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks a lot.